Hello class. In this video, we're going to take a look at the events of the Civil War. And this can include battles, leaders, documents, speeches, anything that you may need to know about the Civil War. Now, before we get started, let's quickly review the event that started the Civil War. And this event was the attack on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is located in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Now, just a few things that you need to know about the attack on Fort Sumter. One, this is the event that started the Civil War. You need to know that the Civil War started at Fort Sumter. Two, you need to know that it happened in 1861. There's not a whole lot of dates that you need to know for this class, but you should probably remember that the Civil War started in 1861. And three, you need to know that the Confederates, the South, fired the first shots. So they essentially have to carry the responsibility of being the ones who started the war. The first real battle that we're going to look at is the Battle of Bull Run. And this is the first major battle of the Civil War. Now, what does this mean? First major battle. This was the first battle that involved a large number of soldiers, and the first battle in which a large number of soldiers were killed. It took place near the town of Manassas, Virginia, on July 21st, 1861. And this was a big wake-up call for both sides. You had about 5,000 troops that were either killed or wounded. So this caused everyone to suddenly wake up and realize, you know what, this war might last for a couple of years, and thousands of people are probably going to die. Also, just as a side note, most Civil War battles, well, maybe not most, but many Civil War battles have two names, because the Union, or the North, tended to name their battles after nearby bodies of water. In this case, this battle took place near a creek called Bull Run Creek. So Bull Run is the northern name for this battle. On the other hand, the Confederates tended to name their battles after towns. So this battle was known as the Battle of Manassas in the South. Now, this battle ended in a Confederate victory. The Confederates won this battle. And this was in large part due to the leadership of a Confederate general named Stonewall Jackson. He was not the overall commander at this battle, but he earned the nickname Stonewall. His real name is Thomas, but he earned the nickname Stonewall at this battle because, according to one witness, he stood like a stone wall while the battle was taking place around him. So, first major battle of the war, first battle in which we have a large number of soldiers killed, and people realize that this war is not going to be easy, and this turns Stonewall Jackson into a hero, and the battle ends in a Confederate victory. Let's fast forward about a year to June 1862. In that month, the President of the Confederacy, who was Jefferson Davis, selected a new general to command the main Confederate Army. And the name of this army was the Army of Northern Virginia. And the job of this army was to protect the capital of the Confederacy, which was the city of Richmond, Virginia. And the general that President Davis chose to take command of this army was Robert E. Lee. So from this point forward, for the next 3 years of the war, any Union army that is going to try to capture the Confederate capital, that's going to try to capture Richmond, is going to have to get through Robert E. Lee. And Lee will defeat Union general after Union general after Union general. And President Lincoln will eventually fire 5 generals before he finally finds someone who is able to defeat Lee. So, just something to keep in mind. Robert E. Lee, he's really the main general of the Confederacy. He's commanding the main Confederate Army, the one that is protecting Richmond, Virginia. And Any Union army that's going to capture Richmond has to go through him at this point. Now, let's talk for just a moment about emancipation. What is emancipation? To emancipate someone means to free them. So, when Lincoln first became president and the war first started, he made it very clear that his number one goal of the war was to preserve the Union, to keep the country from falling apart. He wants to force the Confederacy to rejoin the United States. And he even says when the war first breaks out, if I can preserve the Union, if I can force the South back into the United States by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. And if I could preserve the Union by freeing no slaves, I would do that. And if I could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves, but not others, I would also do that. So for Lincoln, his number one goal is preserving the Union, and emancipation, freeing the slaves, is secondary. However, as the war goes on, Lincoln starts to get reports that slaves are being used by the Confederate Army to do things like move cannons around, build forts, so on and so forth. So he decides to call a cabinet meeting, and he basically throws out the idea of emancipation, and he tells his cabinet, what do y'all think about freeing the slaves? I feel like if we free the slaves, that's going to take a source of labor away from the South, and many of these slaves might join the Union Army. So we would be weakening the Confederacy and strengthening our side. And his cabinet tells him, I like the idea, but let's wait until we win a battle. Because at this point in time, Robert E. Lee had defeated the Union Army for the past several battles. So what his cabinet tells him is, let's wait until we win a battle so we don't look desperate. We don't want people to think that we freed the slaves simply because we're desperate to win the war. So Lincoln agrees to do this. He says, all right, I'll put this Emancipation Proclamation back on the shelf, and I'll leave it there until we win a battle. Well, the next battle after this cabinet meeting that the Union wins is the Battle of Antietam. So let's talk about this battle for just a moment. First of all, this is the bloodiest day of the Civil War. More soldiers are killed in this 24-hour period than any other day in American history. More soldiers are killed here than at Pearl Harbor. More soldiers are killed here than on 9/11. It takes place in Maryland, near the town of Sharpsburg, on September 17th, 1862. Now, notice this battle takes place in Maryland. Maryland is not a Confederate state. It's a slave state, but it's not a state that seceded. So, why is a battle taking place here? Robert E. Lee has invaded the North. He invaded Maryland, and basically, he's trying to get Maryland to secede and join the Confederacy. Well, this doesn't work, and this battle ends in a Union victory. Lee is forced to retreat back into Virginia. Now, remember, Lincoln was waiting for a victory before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So, following the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln does issue the Emancipation Proclamation. He goes public with it, and we will talk about that on the next slide. So the Emancipation Proclamation, it was issued by Lincoln on September 22nd, 1862, just 5 days after the Battle of Antietam. And it declared, and this bullet point is slightly inaccurate. It declared that all the slaves in the Confederate States would be declared free on January 1st, 1863. There were still 4 slave states that we call border states that had not seceded. They were not part of the Confederacy. The slaves in those states were not freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. only the slaves in the Confederate States. Now, the key word here is declared. Lincoln is declaring that these slaves are free. Now, obviously, these states that don't even consider themselves to be part of the United States at this point are not going to say, okay, my slaves can go. No, they're going to keep fighting. So in order to actually make these slaves free, Lincoln is going to have to win the war. So this officially makes emancipation a war aim. So now they are not only fighting to preserve the Union, they are now fighting to free the slaves. And the Emancipation Proclamation also allows African Americans to serve in the Union Army. And by the end of the Civil War, over 100,000, almost 200,000 African Americans, many of them runaway slaves, will be serving in the Union Army. Now let's move into 1863. 1863 is going to be a very important year during the Civil War. First of all, there is the Emancipation Proclamation, which we just talked about. It's issued by Lincoln in 1862, but it goes into effect on January 1st, 1863. Now, the summer of 1863, especially the month of July, is usually considered to be the turning point of the Civil War, because there's two battles that take place literally at the same time. And the first battle that we're going to talk about is the Battle of Gettysburg. It takes place near the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. Now, once again, this is Pennsylvania. This is not a Confederate state. Lee is invading the North. Now, Lee loses this battle. I won't go into the details, but the Confederates lose the Battle of Gettysburg, and Lee is forced to retreat back into the South. So this is the last time that Lee will try to invade the North. So from this point forward, the war will be fought entirely in the South. At the same time that Lee is losing the Battle of Gettysburg, there is another battle that is taking place in Mississippi, and this is the Battle of Vicksburg. Now, one of the Union goals was to capture the entire Mississippi River. If you look at a map of the Confederacy, you will see that the Mississippi River divides the Confederacy into two parts. So if the Union can capture the Mississippi River, they will effectively split the Confederacy in half. So now, technically, this is a siege. It's not your traditional battle, and if you don't remember what a siege is, that means that one army surrounds another army inside of a city or inside of a fort. In this case, the Union Army is trapping the Confederate Army inside the city of Vicksburg. So, like I said, Vicksburg is the last city on the Mississippi River that is still controlled by the Confederates. So, if the Union can capture this city, they now have the entire Mississippi River under their control. Well, on July 4th, 1863, Independence Day, and also the day after Lee loses the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederates surrender, and the Mississippi River is officially under Union control. If you look at this map right here, you can see, here's Vicksburg, and you can see how the South, the gray states, are now officially split in two.